Hello, everyone. Thanks for making the time to join us this evening. My name is Michael. I'm the events coordinator and publicist at Annie Bloom's Books. For those of you who aren't familiar with the store, we're located in Portland, Oregon, in the heart of Multnomah Village. We've been around for, I'm going to round it up to 43 years now, because it'll be 43 years at the end of the month. And we are still going strong despite everything that's going on. Hold on a moment while I admit another person. Hello, hello. Annie Bloom's is open on weekdays from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. and weekends from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Our website is always open. You can shop day and night at annieblooms.com. And we offer curbside pickup, in-store pickup, local delivery within 3 miles of the store, and various shipping options. I'm going to put a link in the chat here for the event site where you can pick up both of these authors' books. We would love that. Let me tell you about some upcoming events we've got. Next week on Tuesday, October 26th, we have Portland author Carolyn Wood with her new memoir, Class Notes, A Young Teacher's Lessons from Classroom to Kennedy Compound. Yes, she worked for the Kennedys. 2 nights after that, Thursday, October 28th, another Portland author, Sally Weisinger, reading from her memoir, Yes Again, Misadventures of a Wishful Thinker. And we've got more events coming up in November, and you can check those out on our event calendar. Tonight, we are delighted to be hosting poets Teresa K Miller and Amanda Moore. Teresa is available to sign books. She's local. If you'd like your book signed and or personalized and have a personalization request, if you would include that in the comments section of your order when you place your order, that would be great. It's going to be a Q&A at the end, so you can feel free to type questions into the chat and I will happily read those to the poets, or you can ask a question live. Let me tell you about Borderline Fortune, which is Teresa's book. It's a meditation on intangible family inheritance. Let's let someone else in before I tell you about this book. Hello, welcome. Borderline Fortune is a meditation on intangible family inheritance of unresolved intergenerational conflicts and traumas in particular, set against the backdrop of our planetary inheritance as humans. As species go extinct and glaciers melt, Theresa K Miller asks what we owe one another and what it means to echo one's ancestors' grief and fear. Drawing on her family history, from her great-grandfather's experience as a school teacher on an island in the Bering Strait to her father's untimely death, as well as her pursuit of regenerative horticulture, Miller seeks through these beautifully crafted poems to awaken from the intergenerational trance and bear witness to our current moment with clarity and attention. Theresa K Miller's second full-length poetry collection, Borderline Fortune, was selected as a winner of the 2020 National Poetry Series by former California Poet Laureate Carol, I don't know how to pronounce this, Muskie Dukes. A graduate of Barnard College and the Mills College MFA program, Miller is the author of Sped and Forever No Low, as well as the co-editor of Food First, selected writings from 40 years of movement building. Her poems and essays have appeared in Ziziva, Alternet, Entropy, Diagram, and elsewhere. Originally from Seattle, she tends a mini orchard near Portland, Oregon. And welcome to another person. Let me tell you about Amanda's book, Requeening. Engaging the matriarchal structure of the beehive, Amanda Moore explores the various roles a woman plays in the family, the home, and the world at large. Beyond the productivity and excess, the sweetness and sting, Requeening brings together poems of motherhood and daughterhood, an evolving relationship of care and tending, responsibility and joy, dependence and deep love. The poems that anchor this collection don't shy away from the inevitability of a hive's collapse and consider the succession of requeening a hive as a new heart ready to be fed and broken and fed again. The collapse is both physical, there are poems of illness and recovery, and emotional. As the mother-daughter relationship shifts, the daughter becomes separate, whole, and poised to displace. The liminal spaces these poems traverse in human relationships is echoed in a range of poetic and hybrid form, offering freedom and stricture as they contemplate the way we hold one another in love and grief. Requeening is a vivid and surprising collection of poems from a winner of the National Poetry Series Open Competition. Letting another person in. And Amanda Moore's debut collection of poetry, Requeening, was selected for the 2020 National Poetry Series by Ocean Vuong. Her poems have appeared in journals and anthologies, including Best New Poems, Ziziva again, and Mamas and Papas on the Sublime and Heartbreaking Art of Parenting. And her essays have appeared in the Baltimore Review and Hippocampus Magazine, as well as on the University of Arizona Poetry Calendar's blog. Serving as poetry editor at Women's Voice for Change and a reader at Vida Review and Bull City Press, Moore is a high school English teacher and lives by the beach in the Outer Sunset neighborhood of San Francisco. Welcome, Teresa and Amanda.
Thank you so much, Michael, and thank you to Annie Blooms, and thanks to all of you. I was just clicking through and seeing all of the names and faces, and that's why I was excitedly waving at the beginning during the introduction. Don't mind me. It's just really nice to see you all here, and I'm sorry that it can't be in person, but I also think, you know, it's an act of love that we've been keeping each other safe, and I definitely am glad that booksellers don't feel like they have to be armchair epidemiologists. So I think this is awesome, and I'm really appreciative of you all for rolling with it and joining us anyway. I'm super honored to be here with Amanda Moore. One of the biggest gifts of this whole very unexpected, very surreal process with the National Poetry Series has been getting to know other poets in my cohort. I didn't know that was going to be a thing. And it's been just really such a gift. And so I feel really honored to be here with Amanda. And before I hand it over to her, I just wanted to acknowledge that we are on the land of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde, and historical and contemporary. And among other things to know about them, they have been doing an amazing vaccine campaign, including for people who aren't members of the tribe. And so I just want to put that in the space as well, both acknowledgement and gratitude. And I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Amanda. So thanks so much, you all.
Thanks, Teresa. I want to echo too the unexpected joy of finding you through this process, and also gratitude for Annie Blooms for just really keeping this space alive, for everyone who's here, and also just to acknowledge that although we're not in person, which is how I'd hoped, I mean, Teresa and I have not yet met in person, we do have this sort of intimacy of Zoom, and I think we're going to make pretty interesting use of it tonight. I'm speaking to you from Ramaita, Shaloni land, and I want to thank Teresa for bringing that into the space too. I thought one of the things that has really been interesting is that on the surface, Teresa and my books are really kind of different, and our poems and our styles seem really different. But upon reading this book and spending time with it, finding moments of confluence or finding things that really bring what we're trying to do on the page together has been really lovely. So I thought we would start maybe by reading our opening poems from our books and putting those side by side. My book relies on the life cycle of the beehive really as an organizing principle. So there are several anchoring bee poems, and I'll start with the first one. It's called Opening the Hive. Late afternoon slants illuminates the worn white husk of hive and gleams like an incubator bulb on the oval of an egg. This might have been the way I was born, to move over my mother and wash from her what was left of painful birth, her legs like the old wood cracked with a hive tool, my lips clamping and the bees burrowing into honeycomb, bathed in sweetness, a taste fresher when robbed this way. Smoke to calm, to push the heaving down to the center where the queen hides and is stroked, flanked by the upturned rumps of guard bees, wings fanning scent in warning. I open this small universe and set it in motion, a new heart ready to be fed and broken and fed again, gathering strength to reseal and take into itself what we leave behind, fingerprints through broken comb and crushed drones. This might have been the way I was born, then set to life, stolen honey clinging to light hair that covers everything new, like late afternoon sunlight, a kiss on my dented forehead, mother collapsed, emptied of poison, barbed stinger, and the baby, the jelly, the bee.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I am learning how to be better at introducing my poems, which I'm learning from Amanda. We just did a podcast together and I sort of dived in headlong and she gave a little spiel and I thought, okay, well, I'm gonna practice. So just to set this up, my book is in 4 parts and the individual poems are not titled, but the 4 sections are. And I think one way to think about the book is, a very ancient mantra, from the mud springs the lotus flower. And that's somewhat of an arc that you might trace in the book. The first section is of the dead, so it's very much concerned with ancestry. And then the next is our own worst consequence, disenthrall, and then lay down your rigid creation. So this first poem comes from Of the Dead. I came here to conjure you. What may I say? Anything, all of it. Friction on the flint, many-armed agent of entropy. What wrath would I risk reaping? What disowning? Who bore me to the shore, pressed me under, dragged there, ragged gasps? If I am already orphaned, why fear orphaning? This splintered boom in my hand.
I love that poem. I can't hear it enough, really. I'm so interested in also what you're saying about your 4 sections and 4 containers, and I love learning more about that. And it makes me think too that one of the areas of connection that actually you spotted between our collections that I hadn't is this idea of objects and containment, like memories in physical, tangible objects. And I really have been thinking about the 4 sections of your book in that way. And I have a few different poems that talk about those lists and those memories and objects. I think I'll read a couple of them and I want to hear more of yours. One of the things I think is super important about hearing yours is a bunch of them in succession really creates that thrall. And then your section disenthrall kind of works ironically against that thrall. So I'm going to read 1729 Maple Avenue, Northbrook, Illinois, which is a bit of a long one. So I'm going to expect you to come in strong after that with lots of yours. 1729 Maple Avenue, Northbrook, Illinois. Gone the marriage, the father, gone the plum tree out front, its wild confetti, steady shade and sticky fruit blotching the sidewalk. Gone the fence we'd be set to paint once a year, white droplets sprinkling the hostas, black house numbers trailing down the upright pole, the birch tree and its paper scrolls, the slap of the side door on its ancient hinge, the hook and eye lock gone, the limestone gravel drive, my sisters and my sock tender feet callousing each summer as we dared one another to race across, gone. The garage, its detritus and stash in the rafters, gone the radiant heat hot spots on the floor, the pull down stairs to the attic and its boxes, old clothes and steam weak cardboard and crumbled bags gone, the window unit AC that kept one bedroom frigid while the rest of the house sweltered and swooned, and the furniture we lugged from room to room, always remaking. Gone the many couches and the weights they held, the transom windows and their cranks, the big bay that once collapsed beneath a roof of half-melted snow. Gone the dishwasher rolled out from the pantry to hook to the sink, skinnying around it on tiptoes to reach the stove. Gone the white phone anchored to the kitchen wall and who we called on it. Gone the extra long cord we would stretch to reach our bedrooms, the rubbery spirals pulled tight. Gone the record player, the VCR, the CDs, the DVDs, the cable box, long gone. the raspberry bush out back, my turned up t-shirt bottom heavy with fruit for breakfast, the jonquils and crocus that would shoulder through some snow-lashed dirt come spring, gone the creek, north branch of the Chicago River that would swell some summers, tip over its bank, and gone the plans to ford it or to build a bridge, gone the single mother, her blue eyeshadow, silk blouses, sour smell of nylons, hot in pointy shoes, gone her gentle nature and her rages too, gone the grandmother, afternoon visits, her handbags and bridge mix, gone her magic and unwanted advice, the joy, the strife, the nesting dolls we were, gone, the death that wedged us open, the green in the windows, the wild, the ordered harmony, and what we knew about the world then, gone, the shelter women give one another, rough love flooding the house and yard.
There's so much to say about that poem, and I'm looking forward to chatting about the parallels once I read some of these, because that one definitely jumped out to me as far as the memories and objects, which is both I've decided to lean on it as a strength sometimes, and it's also a pathology for me. So I'm super curious about that poem. So I'm going to read a series of 3, and then we can kind of talk about those themes. Dregs cast, camper top, torn and bent in the shadow, the continent's highest peak, towns of circling corvids, junctions, ghosts. How will I learn your chaos? Never sprang from me, wasn't mine, this pile of pointless rubble. Now what will you take from me? Breeze flapping the sheets, rock slaps the creek. Will I ever stop reassembling what never rent? You swept through, gust at the screen door, left me beating. I inherited not a house, but the memory of a house. The stranger camouflaged, stretched shadow before breaching the cellar, white paint grit-stained. We cannot ever be alone. Broad day, rain mixed with snow. No harm. No me for 2 generations. No place I could touch except in sleep to say at last, but I didn't live here. So my dragon was a paper lantern, never even wild. When the moth-eaten phantoms tire, may we choke ourselves awake.
One of the things that I love about hearing you read that aloud is the rhythm. I mean, I didn't on the page, I'm not sure those iams come through as heavily, but wow, that's wonderful.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that was something that I liked about yours as well, the gone and the gone and the gone, and it's accreting, and it's at first it's all these objects, and then suddenly it's people, and then it's memories, and then it's dynamics, and this beautiful idea of the shelter women give each other, and it's rough love. And it seems like you've fallen in your family history, or at least as much as it informs the speaker in your poems. The rough love mostly falls on the beloved side, on the, on these longing memories. And I think some of mine fall on the opposite side of that line, even as we're both, crossing back and forth. There's certainly nothing definitive and resolved, I would say, in the emotions of either of our books. But
yeah, I think I'm really struck by the chaos and the pointless rubble, and and the ways in which I think you do sort of demarcate that the tangible things that love is good, the way that you're marking it with objects, that they're a little rougher in that sort of love. And I think about the you know, what you were left with is the memory of the house. And I think that's why I like so much those poems with the tangible objects in your book, because they're suffused with the memory. They stand in for the memory. And so often in your poems, I feel like I'm there and I've been given the experience, but I'm not being told what the experience is, if that makes sense. So it's very evocative. I really love that.
Yeah, and I think that's to some extent it's an artifact of the poems being very spare, and then to some extent it's there's a lot of superstition through this book, and something that I've spoken about elsewhere, as you know, I've been going through this release process, is being raised by an extremely superstitious, extremely phobic, but also very religious grandmother, and you know, a huge taboo in my family. I mean, in general, but particularly in my family, was to speak ill of the dead. So there's something that feels very dangerous in a way, even telling the stories around this book at the same time that it feels super necessary, and the book itself is enacting that process of speaking. So that grandmother, just to tell a story around the poems, was always afraid that something was going to happen if she was home alone. And then one day somebody did try to break into the house where she was. And so then after that, from the age of, you know, whatever, 17 until she died when she was 82, she was never alone for even 5 minutes. Like you couldn't even like run to the 7-Eleven and come back, kind of thing. And it wasn't until later that I realized, like, oh, that's not actually normal.
Wow.
A process in general of my life, but
That's really interesting. I mean, and this gets to that, you know, I think that blurb on the back of your book about legacy and inheritance and the things we inherit might just be a house of memories or a house, but it's also these customs or these superstitions or our reactions to those. And then also the things, which we both also have poems about this idea of legacy.
yeah, for sure. And I'd love to bring, because I feel like it's kind of on this same strand. Maybe we could weave Aunt Annie's sand into it, because I feel like that's a really you know, on point with the conversation.
I always like to think too that maybe my Aunt Annie and some of the characters in your distant past in your poems, they might have known each other. Not actually, because of so many reasons, but they have some of the same mentalities. So this is Aunt Annie's sand. I don't even know who Aunt Annie is. How many greats before her name, or which bronzed face is hers in tintype, which side of which family she claimed, spinster sister of someone else long dead, leafless branch who left no one with her name behind. I only know about her sands the way I know about the Arctic or the green flash at sunset. A promise. Someday you'll see it. Someday we'll park a giant green dumpster out front and toss in the toaster boxes, the crates of wire hangers, moth-nibbled linens, bags of canceled checks. And then perhaps we'll find the bottles. How many could there be? Blue, brown, green, and clear beneath their yellowed, peeling labels, sepia tilt of cursive. Salt Lake, New Jersey, Florida, all the places I imagine her gathering her skirts to kneel and collect, leaving voids she thought too small to notice. The sands, her entry in the messy record my grandmother keeps, a family in objects. All the things and none of their stories, the deeds we did to get them, what we kept and what we stole, this past we've made from pilfered dust.
Should we talk about it first, or should I read my companions? Because
I want to read your companions.
I'll read my companions, and then we can talk about pilfered dust, because there's so much in that poem. Great-grandfather I never knew, your son-in-law born on Skokomish land I still cross, city to the razored oyster beds. Everywhere we've gone to plant our history, the lichen follows. Crab pot hauling up a giant octopus, Quonset hut surfing the permafrost, where my father's little hands could not will a single watermelon to grow. No chance you'd guess how it would subside, how your sudden exit would shackle us to rebirth. Along the way, more than one will renounce you, refusing to say why. Your solace will smash to a bony pulp, go lifeless. The afterimage, your father's furrowed brow, unwinding a trail. You will ascend the last 100 feet scrambling, against columnar basalt, against vertigo, Pacific spit's hooked tail, below the mountain your ancestors stole. One day, history runs out. The schematic alone more than everything you ever toted. The thought of your acacia grazing unfamiliar atmosphere. What dark energy you bring to expand the universe is not yours to inventory. No more testimony.
I really admire the way your poems grapple with the pilfering and with the stealing, with the stolen. I found that through your whole collection, that thing I think we all of us shy away from, owning sort of what our lives are built on here. And yours is definitely a book that really wants to reach into that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm not even sure what to do with that theme a lot of the time, but I've just noticed that I'm kind of the first generation in my family to revisit some of the stories that were handed down as like, isn't this so cool? You know, he went to the Bering Strait. My great grandfather went to the Bering Strait. He was the first white school teacher to make it through the winter on Ingalik, which is Little Diomede Island. And wasn't he adventurous? And I, thought about that story and growing up with that story, and then wondered, well, who was already there and who was he working for and what was he doing? And it's complicated, right? He was a socialist, committed member of the IWW, and by all accounts, including the granddaughter of his Inupiat co-teacher, he was well liked and got along with people on the island. And a big and is he was working for the government school system under the BIA, which is, hugely abusive and damaging as a system to Alaska Native peoples. So, but it's like this sacred story. And that's something that's so interesting to me about Aunt Annie's sand, because I actually had this physical pain that I don't know if it was necessarily meant to be in the poem, but the idea, I mean, I think it was, there's an ambiguity there, right? But of the not knowing where the artifacts came from, like given how much of my memory is stored in objects and how my father was this like intense archivist genealogist, the idea of having something special and having the story be lost is like almost more than I can take, even just in a poem. So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about, that piece, because you also have this kind of unsentimental, we're going to bring the dumpster and that's when we'll find them, and won't it be funny? And then presumably they're going in the dumpster.
Well, I think the dumpster is what happens when we are disconnected from our stories, or when we're not thinking about the implication, which I have to truly believe is maybe the result of the pilfering, that we can't tell the full story. I really truly, I could ask who Aunt Annie is. I'm sure my grandmother told me 100 times, but but she became so divorced from who she was in life. It was just about these objects that we were going to find, and these objects were showing her as the true adventurer she was. And she was often thrown toward me as an example of who I was, as the black sheep, like, oh, you're the Aunt Annie, she traveled too, and look what she brought back. And it's interesting to me that what she brings back is physically land, because land is the most complicated part of my family legacy, thinking about houses that we say we've owned, and places that we've settled, and not ever being given a language to reckon with that growing up, or to even think about that. And I think the attic is an actual attic, and it was full of so much history that was divorced from its story. And I knew there was a Civil War uniform up there, and I didn't even know which side. I mean, of course it was from the Yankee side, because we were in Pennsylvania, but I mean, I truly didn't know who to attach that to, or what sort of story, or what that said about who we were as a family. And so in the end, they really were objects, and they were useless for being detached from their stories.
Yeah,
Which is, again, like, I don't mean to mutually admire all over the place, but I think what's important with the reckoning in your book is that you're willing to hold the nuance. I mean, these characters in your book are also still your family, and there are stories that you're appreciating, but you're not shying from the other side of it too.
yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the goal ideally would be to wake up, right? And to have that clarity, and to keep some of the stories, and to also see them clearly, and to be able to sit with that without flinching away. And that's something that, in having conversations around the book and the theme of the climate crisis in the book as well, I've been thinking about, what does that divorce from reality mean? Denial is super helpful in the short term and super damaging in the long term. And I was just talking with Sabrina Jacobs on KPFA, which is for people in Portland who don't know, like a super fun, awesome, progressive, small listener powered radio station in the Bay Area. And she was asking me, very sincerely, like, why do you think these CEOs, why are they still doing this given the data, And I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't have an answer for that. But I do think so much of it has to do with just that disconnection, the short term versus the slow moving long term crisis. And of course, there's, narcissism in there, and greed, but so much of it is just that we can, in the way that our society is set up, if we want to be detached. And then following that to its logical conclusion, we have, literal apocalypse banging down our door. And then, on the more personal level, where it shows up, particularly in your poems, is that more personal apocalypse, that, that grappling, that sense of disconnection. So.
Yeah, that's interesting too, that sort of personal exceptionalism of the CEO. So that ability to think, somehow I'm not a part of that I'm just a single one person that can't affect that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's the most egregious example, right? But to some extent, all of us are participating in that behavior, some of the time anyway, of, what is our part in perpetuating it. And then some of us are trying to turn back towards it, and some of us are tacking further and further away. So, yeah, did you want to read another one in that section, or do you want to move on to
I don't know. I'm interested in the idea of actually the personal apocalypse, because that's a parallel maybe I hadn't seen before, that there is, in my book, a lot of illness and literal decay and deterioration of bodies. And I hadn't thought about that as an analog in your book.
Yeah, if the book is doing what it's supposed to, or what I thought it was supposed to. I mean, we've talked before too, how these books, they're like children, and they you breathe life into them, and then they go off and do their own thing, and you think, oh, I didn't know you were going to do that. But if my book is doing what I had originally planned to kind of breathe into it, it's working on a personal level, and then, an intrapersonal level within the self, and then interpersonal, particularly within family systems, and then ecological as well. So.
If my book is like a child, I'm getting along better with it than my actual child right now.
Which is another one of the themes we were going to talk about a little bit, right?
Yeah.
This sort of idea of reinvention and self-destruction through both childbearing and childlessness. So I don't know, did you want to read Omne Trium Perfectum?
Oh, yeah, I do want to read that one. I was thinking about that earlier today because it was a poem that comes from being asked repeatedly when I was going to have another child or why I didn't have another child. There is this assumption that only children are broken or wrong or the result of something odd. And it's, I can buy into that thinking sometimes because it's so deeply ingrained, and not celebrating that as a choice, as a life has been kind of a theme. So people are always asking, and I decided also, because this book writes about some of the harder parts of mothering and doesn't try to sugarcoat it, that I did also want to include some positive or something beautiful about having a child. So this is Omni Trium Perfectum, which is loosely, everything perfect in threes, or everything wonderful in threes. Two alone, we two were, a duet, a tipping over on our duo of shaky legs. We needed another to make us solid, triangular, like a milking stool, a trinity, the many and infinite, yes, and oddness, but also indivisible, more practical than magical, airplane row, circus rings, pieces of suit, but what ordinary magic? Limit and goal, the start of something, 1, 2, 3-legged race, a leap, hands clasped into the lake, an arc, not line, more fluid than flat, more graceful than straight. We are excess and overflow, waltz, polka, not binary or system, not symmetry, not table, square, clout, but something rare, a curiosity. We are braid, a weaving, a wisdom, archetype and biblical, fairy tale tries, or a coven, sharing a single eye. We are danger, 2, in 3, in nature, leaves of 3. Primary, all colors can be made from us, and all matter, proton, neutron, the swinging electron, molecule and elemental, 2 hydrogens, rounded by her oxygen, nothing, into water. What poem are you going to read?
I am going to go slightly literal, but we can riff on it with this idea of the three-legged race. So, where you are beyond the glass is not the real game. Our strides unreconciled, our ties too loose. You unspooled 5,000 promises. I wound them up, a pitted anchor, a counterweight. Truth tempts banishment. Finish this tale before braiding a prettier one. So I was so interested when we were talking in advance, when we were kind of deciding what we were going to read, and you casting the poem as being sort of in defense of having an only child, of having it be intentional, because as someone who doesn't have children, I was reading it as almost a defense of having children at all. And of course, when I went back and reread it, then I could, see what you meant. But yeah, there's a sense of the unevenness of it, but it's uneven in not adding another child, but also uneven in taking the couple in the book off of its kind of symmetry. And that's something that I really love about your collection, is the way that you don't flinch, speaking of clarity, in the face of what's lost, and also of course what's gained, because there's a lot to be gained from having a child, and there's clearly so much in your personal life and in the book, for the speaker, that's very celebratory of children, and also enumerates the many lies that were told prior to having that child, or that were internalized, or that were assumed.
Yeah, and those lies don't, it's not that it's terrible, but the lies are just this unrealistic version of what ends up being a very unvarnished and tricky truth. And I'm actually really, I wish I had been writing this poem more as a defense of having children at all. I think that's how I'm gonna go back and read it tonight and think about that. What strikes me about the poem that you read, in addition to just sort of the literal connections, is it takes me back to one of the most intriguing questions in your book, or that I have as a reader about your book, and that's the shifting you and these poems of address. And what I love in that last bit of that poem is it moves to the imperative. So it's not just addressing you, but starting to order you around. And I wonder if you want to say a little bit about how you see that second person, because for me, it is, I do a little bit of addressing in my book, but so much of it is first person and so much of it is grounded in the I, that I really appreciate the way you focus the lens elsewhere.
Yeah, I guess sometimes trauma does interesting things for artistic aesthetics, right? Not to make light of my own trauma, but I guess that's my prerogative. Um, yeah, it's slippery. The I and the you are super slippery in the book. And you've read my first book, Sped. And when we were talking about this one, I said, well, this book is like so direct and just lyric and, so just straightforward compared to my first book. I feel so unfragmented as a speaker in this book. But yeah, it's super, super slippery. And I think it's parts of the mind speaking to each other. I think it's ancestors speaking to progeny they'll never meet, to descendants they'll never meet. I think it's descendants speaking to ancestors. There's an aspect of fortune telling in the book, again, to draw on that very superstitious conjuring grandmother. There's an aspect of trying to tell the future. I mean, she both thought that I would never see her when she went to heaven because I wasn't ever baptized, and would turn around and read tea leaves. So it's just this super interesting combination of psychological phenomena happening that influenced me and the way that I think about my own memory. It's memories speaking to each other. It's humans speaking to animals and to the landscape. It's the landscape speaking back. And yeah, I think there are elements, sort of artifacts like scaffolding left over in the book of me speaking to myself to go ahead and finish it. And it's not a linear story, it's a collection of poems, but to go ahead and finish the story, even though it felt at the time extremely dangerous. And I thought maybe this will just be a Word file that I'll, leave on my computer. So joke's on me, but.
And aren't we all lucky that you did not leave it that way? It's really interesting to hear you talk about that you being so varied, because one of the things I love is that it really has a bite sometimes, and also tenderness. And we've talked a little bit about how I find your book to contain joy. And I mean, it really is this very capacious, these 4 poems, the amount of emotion that can get jammed in there. And some of it now makes sense to me with the slipperiness of that you, or that the you is shifting and changing.
Yeah, I think we have a similar handle on joy between the books, that, the joy comes when you look at like the giant pile of shit and name it, and then suddenly you see what else is going on, but the suffering comes in the denial, the suffering comes in the like, I didn't know love until my child came, and now every day is, a beautiful dream. It's like that. There's actually a ton of pain in that kind of denial. Just as there's a ton of pain in not just naming, like, my father was killed when I was 23 and he's gone. And, that's a thing in the book. But I also loved so much. I think you're the first person who really pointed to the lightness and the joy in the book. And I thought, good, because it is heavy, but it also, I hope it also moves. I hope it also
Oh yeah.
transforms and doesn't just dwell. So.
But again, that line, I had a father, like you had, like, so that you'll never have another. Yes. And the having, to me, is so much more heightened. I mean, I don't have the line in front of me, but I think about it probably every day, that like,
Wow.
the elevation and then just the reality of it.
Well, I'm super honored. Thank you.
We were going to read poems about faith too.
Yeah, let's do it.
Do you want to Do you want to start this time?
Sure. I'm asking you to believe in what you've never seen or heard. Still, listen. It will save you. Don't misunderstand. No personal God will resurrect to offer grace. No reward waits on the other side of suffering. Instead, imagine your skull dissolved. Not your temporal armor, but the rampart you think you stare from. No longer the sound of the bird's chirp or the car passing, but movement in the plane where your head used to be. Can you find that place? She will swing from her bow, but you'll have nothing left to break. The weak graft split overnight, bangles of unripe apples in the mulch. There was no resurrection. Nothing to do but throw away the old tree and move on. We mark and fuss over the particulars, but absence begins the lowest rung. The branches sang me silent. Papery maple skittered on the window. Cutting too hard, too fast, spurs a reaction in kind. My creator topped them all. 30 winters thrust through summer, I clenched my swallowed octaves. You twirled me a crackling helicopter, chased me a birch twig broom. It wasn't all bad, was it? Didn't we, in the slant light, have fun?
Do you want to say anything about what those poems are grappling with in terms of faith?
Why don't you get your faith
Okay.
in the mix and then we'll talk.
All right, I'll do that.
And also,
this-
oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just want to encourage people, if you want to ask questions, Michael's going to pop back in at the end. So
yeah,
if anything
we're
occurs to you.
moving toward wrapping it up too. So ask questions now. This is gratitude. And actually, even though I've read your book a few times, I just found new resonances in listening to, and those apples, they're amazing. All right, gratitude. Don't talk to me of a God. It's not what saved me. And it's not what unleashed profligate cells, punishment, warning. Not just soul. I am a concrete form, text, vehicle, matter. So I say my prayer to the lungs, each day unconsciously expanding, my trunk a bellows of effort, each nave of me replete. I thank this institution of self, corporeal, incarnate frame, muscles that lift my body from the bed to the couch to the world, that beat my heart and turn my head toward sunlight, the aggregate, the ocean of fluids, blood, lymph, urine, bile, tide of systems pumping, T cells and lymphocytes, principle and material, they take my health where it is needed, celestial and resonant, while holding back the darkness. I thank nothing but my body for this life.
Well, I feel moved first to say I'm so glad you're still here, because some of seriously, because those poems are really tough. I'm so glad you put them out in the world. And I'm also so sorry you went through that. And I have a sense of a kind of breaking open and transformation in some of what we've been talking about, that, you know, we don't go choosing our crises, and we have the opportunity to rise to the occasion. And it seems like you really did. And your speaker, as a result, has some very moving stories to tell. So
Thanks. It's tough to, you know, I think those experiences can sometimes turn people toward very intangible faiths. And I really actually wondered if that would happen to me at one point, if this would be what swings the door open to that kind of belief. And in fact, it just really pushed me the other way.
yeah, it's funny because the very religious grandmother who's very present in those three poems I read, I think she was just kind of a, you know, whatever, congregationalist in the way that people were in the 40s and 50s, and, you know, kind of community based and whatever. And then my grandfather got colon cancer, and suddenly, you know, they were in church every Sunday. So I do think that it has that power.
I mean, it has some power, but I'm not sure what the power ultimately is. It gets you someplace or something.
Yeah.
Do you want to move toward wrapping up?
Yeah, I'm not seeing questions pop up. People can certainly ask questions if they want, but yeah, maybe we'll close out with our last poems. And before we move into that, I do want to thank Annie Blooms again for hosting us. And I hope that over the course of this reading, we've piqued your interest, and you'll want to check out our books, and you'll want to check out our books from Annie Blooms specifically, and not that other place that sells books, because Annie Blooms is just really a gem in Multnomah Village, and it's such a sweet space. And I've been to in-person readings there in the past and look forward to doing so again. But I think one of the things the pandemic has really shown is the importance of literary community, and we are finding ways to do that online as well. But some of the other places that sell books online are not having magical gatherings online. So I just want to express my gratitude and encourage you all to show Annie Bloom some love, whether it's with our books or, you know, whatever you want to read next. So
Thank you.
And put your faith too in the booksellers. You know, so many people are talking about the supply chain problem, so they're not gonna be able to get the books they want. You have to remember too that that's a whole profession and a loving one. So let them help you pick out your books for gifts this year. But I want to echo that and just say I cannot wait to be in Annie Bloom's in person and make my own pilgrimage to spend all of my money there.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, do we have any questions? Feel free to pop up on the screen, type them into the chat.
Maybe while people are gathering questions, we will read the last poems in the book, if that works, and then we'll check back in for final questions.
I'm actually not going to read the very last poem in my book because it's a long one that's more a lyric essay. So I'll just read the last actual poem, and then Teresa, I want yours to be the last words we hear. So I'm going to jump in front of you. This is After Swarm. As for when my first bees knit themselves together in a single sovereign self and slunk over the fence in search of their truant queen, I couldn't say, not with my own house to mind. They could have been gone for weeks when I noticed the hive grave still and empty of their chance. By then, a thing in me, some rotten cell, had broken off too, though I didn't yet know it was sliding through a dark body system, the same stealth path as a swarm, channel not meant to be traced by eye or die until arrival, seething growth suspended low. Though I looked, I didn't find my missing bees, a fist of them dangling from a neighbor's tree, excised from the world, their hive left full of labor. I couldn't call them home. What an easy harvest. My first, no need to leave honey so bees could overwinter, measuring enough for me, enough for them. I cut wax caps from cell tops, spun out every drop, and took it all. Now This last jar, all grit and crystal with age, it's time to order a new batch of bees for spring, clean the moldy hive brought down from rafters, and brush out my veil. I will be alive this time to what swells and roils the colony, the first cluster gathering on the fence line. I will heed.
Such a great last line. What then was the nature of light? The new system hung incommensurate, though it had the same name, as in marriage or mother. A ripple of photons banded at the margin, where we jumped one state to another. I wanted for you the invisible door, the one you couldn't search for, the end of your breath's long hallway.
Lovely. We do actually have a couple of questions now.
Great.
Tricia Sellinger, what first drew you to poetry and at what age? And any favorite poets? Either of you, I suppose.
Yeah, you want to go first?
I think sound probably drew me to poetry. I don't have a lot of really early memories, but there was a Robert Frost book length poem of it was just one poem, but it had been illustrated to be a book called Birches. And so I think I hear that a lot. I find myself rhyming, although I really try to break it up now with lineation. And favorite poets, I mean, I think of the poets who make my poetry possible. And I think of Lucille Clifton and Sharon Olds, who really taught me how to make poems from my own life, and Jack Gilbert, who lets me write in pain, and Rilke, and literally Ellen Bass, who is a poet who invited me into her living room and helped me find my way to the page. What about you, Teresa? I'm so interested because I was just reading one of the blurbs on the back that evokes Blake and Dickinson and Hopkins and Miller right up there in lights. Those three big poets.
Oh, dare to dream, right? My eyes got very wide when you were talking about the illustrated Robert Frost book because my dad actually gave me a copy of, but it was Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening, and it was book length illustrated. And I was in elementary school, and I think that's one of the early moments. I had actually written a poem at daycare when I was about 4 or 5 in crayon on like leftover printer paper, the kind with the edges that you used to rip off. And the daycare coordinator came up to my mom when she came to pick me up and said, "Do you know what Teresa did?" And I thought I was like in trouble. So I think it started before conscious memory. My parents, one of the really big gifts that they gave me was just an intense love of language and jumping up from the table and reading from the dictionary for fun. And but that Robert Frost book certainly sticks in my memory as a time when I thought, oh, it's not just something you draw, or you scribble out at daycare, it ends up in a book. But I would say big influences. Lucille Clifton is certainly huge for me. Lawrence Ferlinghetti, E.E. Cummings, Lucy Brock-Broido, C.D. Wright. Those are some of the big ones. When I was at Barnard, I studied with Saskia Hamilton. I wasn't an English major, but I had a mentorship with her. And I think she's one of the early poets where I realized you could be very personal and very spare. And, but also kind of slant, like not narrative. So I think that shows up in my work for sure.
I don't think I got that lesson.
Tracy Ann, did you want to ask on camera or want me to read that? I saw you pop up here. I'll go ahead. Okay. How do you both get inspiration for your poems? What is your process in terms of capturing your ideas and forming them into poetry?
Oh, Teresa, I can't wait to hear you answer this.
Well, first of all, hi, Tracy. Hi, Dawn. Nice to see your faces. Yeah, inspiration. Wow, I am not a poet embedded in academia, which I have finally learned is okay. I'm not sure I knew that was okay early on. I went to Mills College, very experimental program in Oakland, like beautifully experimental, but much more interested in kind of blowing open the canon than mastering the canon. So there's almost an element of my work where I feel like it's kind of this like autodidact quality to it. So yeah, inspiration. I mean, I think the story that I tell periodically is I went to AWP, which is a big writers conference, right after I finished Mills, and I went to see Alice Notley speak. And somebody kind of leaned over and whispered like this, secret and said, she engages in self-hypnosis. And I thought like, oh, that's okay. So that's allowed. Like, so I mean, not to sound too out there, but I really feel like I go and I knock on the door of my subconscious and I drag this big fishing net and to mix metaphors as a poet. And I, bring up a bunch of gunk and then say, what do I have? Like, what is this? And so I feel like my work is always trying to kind of go back and forth across that line of the conscious into the subconscious and come back and see what do they have to tell each other. What about you, Amanda?
I want to take a workshop on that, on knocking on the door of my consciousness and seeing what gets dredged up. I mean, and I think it's so interesting to put that in the light of hypnosis, because I wonder if there is a certain amount of that in my practice too, that I'm looking all the time for ways to find my way toward my own language. And a lot of that comes from reading, deeply reading a text and trying to parse its syntax or trying to parse what it's doing as a way to find my own way to these ideas in my subconscious that I might not otherwise have known. So I don't write in aha moments, although I do take a lot of notes in aha moments, but really it's a steady, I hate to say it's a lifestyle, but it really is that I'm always writing with sticky note. I have sticky notes everywhere when I'm writing down language, copying things, and they all end up in my notebook so that when I am ready to knock on whatever doors of my consciousness, I can pull from what's already been dredged up in that net and find ways that it fits together. And sometimes if I don't have a form, I really can find it in another poet's syntax or in their approach. And so that's what, I write every day, or I get to say I write every day because I read every day. And I count that as two of the one or two, they're both the same act.
And you have a really intense notebook practice, right? Like I saw a picture on Twitter of the notebook practice and it looked kind of amazing.
It is. I mean, I've actually been perfecting it. There's another poet that I work with named Molly Spencer who does workshops on notebooking that, I've learned some tricks from her, but the notebook is a huge thing for me. And I think some of that comes from, you talked about being outside of academia. Like I'm also old, like I've been writing poetry in my tiny little self outside of the poetry world and outside of academia for 20 years. And so that notebook was my community for a long time. So I sort of learned that everything goes in the notebook, and I never know actually what's going to be useful, a recipe or notes from a meeting at work. Like sometimes that finds its way into poems, which I love.
Mm-hmm.
We have more questions from Tracy Ann. Teresa, in regards to the fishing net analogy, do you write about everything in the net and then refine it? And then a kind of follow up that ties in with that, do you refine in your mind primarily or on paper?
That's changed over time. I think in college I wrote some really strong poems straight onto the paper by doing the revising in my head, and it's because I was a lifeguard. And so I would just be sitting there for hours in this at this basement pool that actually makes an appearance in the book, where we had the cockroaches like gilling knives and the creosote seeping up through the white tiles. But something about needing to stay awake, and you can't read because you have to just watch the swimmers go back and forth, and as soon as their stroke is off, you got to be ready to jump in and save them because you don't have a lot of time. So there was a way that my poems started taking on that rhythm, and my process started taking on that rhythm, and so I was revising in my mind, and then when it went on paper it was pretty much done. And I'm actually glad you asked that question, because I feel like now I need to go back and find a pool to look at, because I've been missing that. I've been doing more of the revising on paper. And it works out. But yeah, I think when everything goes onto the page, then there's a lot to throw away. It definitely doesn't all end up in the book in any form. So.
Teresa, that's so lovely too, because I told you I heard so much rhythm in your work. And I think that, like, I'm of course enchanted because I have a water practice too, but this idea of watching swimming and only being able to revise in your head, like all the best stuff sort of simmers up, and then it has to be something you can capture and remember, which is often where rhythm comes. And in the morning, I'm out there surfing, reworking a line in my head over and over and over again. And I will feel like I've done an hour's worth of work, and I'll come home and I'll take the just out of a line, or I'll take one syllable out and be like, look at that.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That's interesting that you bring that up, because I think I had that sense as I was reading the book, and then you talking about it has reminded me that wanting to touch fear, and that being in the ocean and the ocean coming for you. And there's definitely a collaborative sense, not just with the bees, but also with the ocean, for sure.
All right, we're going to do one last question from Sarah Guest. Can you say a bit about how your books were chosen for the series and how your cohort works?
Well, first of all, hi, Sarah. I'm super honored that you're here. Thank you for coming. And yeah, good question. I don't know, maybe Amanda has a better answer. I think it's magic. When I was working on this book, like I had another book that I was working on for years. So my first collection came out in 2013, and I had this really important schedule that I was on, that I was going to release my next book within 2 years. And now here we are, 8.5 years later. So sometimes good things come when you wait. But I ended up having to shelve that second book. It's in a drawer. I still think it's good. I'll come back to it at some point. And then this one I was just working on, and I don't know how to explain it, but I felt like I was channeling the book. And at the same time I was working on it, I was literally saying in the back of my mind, you're working on your National Poetry Series winner. And it wasn't like a affirmation or a mantra. It was just, my brain was like, hey, guess what? You're working on your National Poetry Series winner. And then I got the call from Carol Muskie-Dukes, and I'm coming from this small press experimental poetry background. So I'm thinking, oh, I won the milkweed spot, which is a big small press, to use an oxymoron, in the US. And I would have been super stoked. And she said, yeah, and it's for Penguin. And I actually had this moment of like, what? Like I'm an experimental small press poet, and Penguin's this giant publisher. Like, what does that even mean? So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I know the basic process is you submit your manuscript. The organization culls it down to a group of 50 or 60, and then sends it out to 5 anonymous judges, and they rotate, and you don't know who they are until the winners are announced. So for Amanda and me, it was Carol Muskie-Dukes, who's the former poet laureate of California, and then Ocean Vuong, who needs no introduction. But yeah, and the cohort has just been this gift where we've been in touch, and I feel super blessed, but I don't know if everybody has that experience. So I don't know. What was your experience, Amanda?
Well, I think a lot of the cohort is you, Teresa. Like, she has remembered every single one of our pub dates and sends a little email and pings us now and then. And I think we all bring something to it. Wendy came in with lots of questions, and it was helpful to pool our resources. And I tend to be a little bit of an organizer, so I'm like, I will get us AWP panels and readings. For me, my book, parts of the book, the seeds were planted 20 years ago, and I had been submitting some version of bee poems as part of manuscripts back when I was submitting. And then I didn't for a long time. And I made this big commitment in 2019. I did some summer work, and I took a residency. And I remember putting the book together in the residency and really feeling like, oh, this is it. This is going to happen. And I started submitting it right away. And really quickly, after years of rejections, it started getting sort of finalist nods, and I sensed it was close. I never had the wild dream to think National Poetry Series, but I was teaching, and I teach high school. I was teaching online, and my phone was near me, and I kept getting this weird phone call from a number I didn't know. And there was something that, I know that happens to all of us, but there was something about that where I was like, who would call me from Connecticut? And I picked it up and heard a voicemail from Ocean Vuong, and I just knew when he said, "Hi, Amanda, this is his beautiful cadence. This is Ocean Vuong." I just knew what it was going to be. I mean, we already knew we were finalists, so I guess I was in that suspended animation. And he, the gravity of it, I don't think occurred to me in the same way it did to you, Teresa. That when he said, "You'll be with Echo, with Robert Haas and Louise Glick and the great hallowed halls of Echo," he was so lovely. And it's just been such a treasure. So the treasure, of course, starts with Ocean, but I really have to say the treasure has been this cohort that you really have helped create.
Oh, well, likewise. I mean, yeah, you've done a ton of work on pulling us together as well and giving us opportunities. So it's just really amazing to be here with you tonight. And I know it's coming to an end, but thank you to everyone for being in the audience and asking good questions, and just super, super blessed. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks to everyone.
Thanks to you too for choosing Annie Blooms to share your lovely work. It was really great to hear. Put that link there again where you can purchase the poet's books. And again, if you want Teresa to personalize it, please include that in your comments. This is getting recorded. It's going to be on our YouTube channel probably later tonight. I'm going to put that link in there too, the general YouTube channel, where you can find it later and share it with friends who weren't able to make it. And thanks again, everyone. Have a really, really good night. Bye.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.